Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So my name is Louis, and today we're going to be talking about the old approach to the Richter-Rauzer. So we're going to get the Classical Sicilian via e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, and bishop g5. So the Richter-Rauzer. Yeah, and in this position, we've already discussed the mainline alternatives such as like queen b6 and a6, and bishop d7 as well. But in here, we're just going to continue with e6, the most common move. And after queen d2, we're going to play a6 here. So this is a useful move just to prevent any bishop b5 or knight b5. Noticing that once you played e6, the d6 pawn becomes quite a lot weaker. And so if you play bishop d7 immediately, I think just knight b5 right now is very strong. So we're in a lot of trouble here. And so we typically play a6, and if we go into the main line, which we will discuss in the next video, it could go something like castles, bishop d7, f4, bishop e7, and after a move like knight f3, b5, we get into this position where many things can happen. Bishop f6 is the main move, e5 is another move, a3 is a sideline, which is very dangerous, and we'll discuss that in the next video. But in here, I just want to talk about maybe the eighth moves in this position. First off, what could white do in this position after e6? And then I also want to discuss the old approach to the main line. So first off, bishop e2. This is a line that Sergei Kudrin chose against Yermolinsky in 1998. The idea being that white wants to put pressure on the center quickly with the rook d1, and then like at some point you could even take on f6 and like damage our structure, or with those sort of ideas. And so here there are two bishop moves, either bishop e7 or bishop d7. So maybe I just want to ask you to consider which move is better. And after you've paused the video, hopefully you've come to the conclusion that one is better than the other. Yeah, and so basically in this position, the best move, I believe, is the move bishop d7. So this was recommended by Sam Shankland. It reaches a dry position, but I think that bishop e7 is just asking for it. For example, after bishop e7, rook d1 is the idea. And after this, knight takes d4 is maybe the best move, because if we castle here, which was chosen by Yermolinsky, castles, and then like rook b8 was chosen in the game, this actually allows white to gain quite a big edge actually after knight c6. But in the game, knight b3 was chosen, and Yermolinsky eventually won the game. But the problem here is that knight c6, bc6 happens, and for example b3, d5, bishop f3, bishop b7, and we notice that our rook on b8 is actually quite misplaced. So after bishop f4, attacking the rook, you have to go rook c8, knight a4 happens, and our dark squares are very weak. So for example, if c5 happens, then we can suddenly get an isolated pawn kind of structure after ed5, bishop d5, bishop takes, knight takes, c4, knight takes f4, queen f4, queen c7, and after we simplify into this endgame, we can see that we have 2 pawn islands. We have 3 pawn islands, and while white has 2 pawn islands. And even if we put our bishop to f6 and try to put it on d4, this allows the rook to infiltrate to d6, and I think that we're in quite a bit of trouble here, even though the engine says it's maybe holdable. And so that's the reason why this entire idea with bishop e7 and like castling is not very good. But maybe in this position, instead of castling, which is chosen by Yermolinsky, we could choose the move knight takes d4. This trades pieces into a middle game. It equalizes pretty much quite easily, but so we can just continue with queen d4 and bishop d7, bishop f6, queen d6. And one thing that we see often in the Classical Sicilian is we can sacrifice the d6 pawn to get the bishop pair compensation. But normally, at least most of the time, if the queens are still on the board, it's going to be quite dangerous for black. And so in this position, we can play bishop c6. And after we simplify everything on d8 and bishop d3, we note that we have the bishop pair, and this should be enough compensation, because we also note that the knight on c3 is not that good. The bishop on d3 is also not that active. And after the very strong move g5, we're preventing white from pushing f4 and gaining more space. And I think that personally, I'd be very happy to reach this position. The computer says it's equal, but it's definitely a lot easier to play with black because we have a lot of pressure here on these two diagonals. So that's maybe one of the better options in the bishop e7 line. But another move maybe which is simpler is the move bishop d7. And after castles, knight d4, so similar idea, queen d4, bishop e7. So this is like similar to the line that we just saw, but rook d1 was not included. Yeah. Also, maybe something I need to mention is that after this bishop d7 and like, for example, bishop e7 and rook d1, one of the ideas is that if you push h6, the bishop can like, for example, I mean, after knight d4, queen d4, if we push something like h6, the bishop doesn't necessarily need to take. It could even just retreat to c1, which is maybe one of the thematic ideas of Gudrun's idea. So anyways, after bishop d7 and like we reach this position where we simplify and bishop e7, black gets pretty much a playable position here. I mean, there's nothing much to complain about. We have the well, both sides still maintain the bishop pair, and it's going to be a complex middle game where maybe at some point we can push b5 and like rook c8, queen c7 is quite standard, and we should be happy to get this position. Though technically both bishop moves are playable. The next thing is the eighth move f3. So if we go into the like one of the main lines, which is after castles, bishop d7, and the move here f3, this is the one of like the very important positions in the Richter-Rauzer. It's quite solid. We're just what's approach is just to prevent any of the like pressure down the e4 pawn and just trying to get a more solid position with a like a typical English attack type setup with like g4 h4. But with the bishop on g5, it's typically not very useful, and so most of the time white wants to retreat to e3 to allow for g4 g5. Anyways, that's just something that I want to bring up, because if we notice in this position, instead of castling and then playing f3, white can immediately play f3. But there's quite a big difference here. The difference is that we don't necessarily need to play bishop d7 and transposes the main line after castles and knight d4. This is transposes the main line that Shankland recommends even. But we can play the move instead of bishop d7 to play the move bishop e7. And after castles, then we're still going to take on d4, queen d4, and b5. So now that we haven't played bishop d7, we can possibly commit the bishop to a better diagonal on b7 instead of d7, which is, I think, quite a big difference here. And you can see that black scores quite greatly in these type of positions. And okay, we need to know that against, like, for example, g4, I think that's, yeah, some simple move like developing like bishop b7 should be fine, and black seems to score quite greatly in these positions. The bishop on g5 isn't helping white to push the kingside pawns forward. And next, we don't even need to like castle and commit to the kingside attack. We can just play queen c7, try to bring the rook to c8. These are all reasonable moves because if we're castling into it, then we're kind of asking to get checkmated here. And so that's just something to note if g4 happens. But if h4 happens, which is maybe the most common move, we can just simply play bishop b7, and similar to the other position, we should be quite happy here with like queen c7 and rook c8. And yeah, so that's the position that could arise after f3 in this move order. How about f4? So again, this is like similar to the main line, but without including castling here. And there's also quite a big difference. So I hope that after this video, you if you face this in like blitz, for example, and your opponent makes inaccurate moves such as f4 or like f3 in the other in the previous variation, we can immediately punish it. Because if we play bishop d7, then it transposes to the main line, which is very complicated, and white objectively still has an edge in these positions. But we can play the move h6 here, and the only move basically is to play bishop f6, because bishop h4 runs into the quite the common tactic, knight e4. So we just want to take this bishop next. We already won a pawn, so for example, possible continuation is bishop d8, knight d2, knight c6, bc6, bishop a5, and knight f1, rook f1, and d5. So we have the bishop pair, and we're just up a pawn here. We're close to winning, basically. And so if bishop h4 is not playable, then they have to play bishop f6, which is quite a sad move. And after queen f6, there are like 3 moves here. Castling just allows us to win the f4 pawn after knight d4, queen d4, and queen f4. So that's not good. And against moves like knight c6, we should be quite happy to reach this position. bc6, castles, and queen d8 here. Black has a very healthy position here. The bishop pair and a big pawn center. I don't think white can attack us in any way, so we should be quite happy here. And against the move knight f3, we have the immediate and strong g5. So this is like a very thematic move that you often see when this pawn is on f4. We're just trying to undermine this center, and for example, if they actually take the pawn here, obviously this is not good because bishop h6 can come. And if queen g5, then we can just simply trade, and I think we can get a lot of tempi here with like bishop g7, or apparently the computer also recommends knight e5, or b5 is also playable. All of these moves provide sufficient compensation for the pawn, and we have also the bishop pair. So moving on to the next variation is, so if f4 and f3 are maybe small inaccuracies, then how about knight c6? This is actually quite a reasonable idea, just trying to get out of like the main theory. And the idea is that after we play bishop d7, we're obviously defending our knight, and we have the option of bishop takes c6 after like white takes on c6. And so by taking on c6 first before we play bishop d7, white is removing that possibility, and we can continue after bc6 and castles. The simplest way is just to go bishop e7 and try to aim for d5 here. For example, a dubious move would be like f4, because we can immediately break with d5, and we have enough center control here. We've basically equalized. For example, e5 knight d7 is a sample line, and maybe the most complex thing to consider is the move h4. But after the very strong f6, ef6, knight f6, I think we have a pretty good advantage here. For example, g4, rook b8, trying to go queen b6 and add some pressure. Bishop f6 can happen, bishop f6, and like g5. This looks kind of scary, but just know that after bishop e7, we have the bishop pair, we have queen b6 ideas, and for example, after bishop h3, we can castle. And after queen e3, just applying pressure on e6, we can play the move queen d6 here, attacking f4, and for example, knight e2, just defending. We can go c5 and preventing the knight from coming to d4, and we should be better here, basically. And so f4 is not that good. How about h4? In this position, I think the simplest way is just to castle. And against moves like bishop f6, then we can just take with the bishop. And overall, we're quite happy with if white takes here, we have the moves like queen b6. With rook d8 coming, for example, e5, rook d8 can happen. For example, maybe this is the most complicated line with knight a4. But after queen a5, we should be happy here. Queen c6 and the very strong bishop e7. Just deflecting the queen here. And so we have queen a4. And they cannot take because we have queen f4 check, delivering mate. And so we should be better here. Oh yeah, and noting that the king is very exposed even. And so if bishop f6 is not that good, then bishop c4 looks reasonable, but I think we can just immediately break with d5. And we've seemed to equalize in the center, and we're quite happy here. And the last variation in the knight c6 variation here is that after bc6, castles, bishop e7, there's also the move bishop f6 here, which was chosen in a game we can see between Wei Yi and Grishuk, so Wei Yi chose this move. And after gf6, so bishop f6 is not good because after we trade everything on a d6, this structure is way too weak for black to be able to get any compensation. And so we need to play the move gf6 here. So gf6, and after bishop c4, bishop b7, and basically here queen c7 and castles is going to come, with d5 also going to come in the future. So we can just follow this game. After bishop b3, queen c7, f4, castles, and so Wei Yi versus Grishuk happened, followed in this fashion, and we can see that black is very solid here. Rook hf1 and then d5, so we break in the center. After queen e2, king b8, just securing the king. a3 was played, and h5 here. So this is a common move that you will find just to prevent the queen from entering the h5 square to harass some of the pawns. And this also restricts the majority, the 2-pawn majority here on the king side by white. So this is also something you'll often see with like h4 also coming. King b1 is played, and then h4 comes, f5, and then suddenly queen e5 comes. So in the game between Wei Yi and Grishuk played rook d to e8, but I don't see a reason as to why we wouldn't just play queen e5 immediately. We want to also play bishop d6, and eventually like coming to c7 eventually. And this is quite a good position for black, and I suggest you to follow that game, which I will link in the description below. And so that covers the knight c6 move. And here maybe going into the main line after castles, the most common move here is to play bishop d7, and for example after f4, yeah, we've seen this position many times. Go bishop e7, for example, and this is the modern approach. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the old way to play, which is the move b5 here. So very ambitious. I mean, it seems that black seems to soar quite greatly in this position. I mean, maybe after bishop f6, it's not looking that great, but yeah, in terms of like probability, but it's still definitely playable. And we can see that like Caruana has played this, Topalov has played this, Gelfand and Li Chao, even though they've lost their games, I mean, it shows that, I mean, Caruana is definitely no slacker in terms of his preparation. So this should be a reasonable variation to get. So after b5 in this position, there's a move bishop f6 and gf6. So noting that we cannot play queen takes f6 because e5 can happen. And suddenly after de5, there's knight d takes b5. And we have a mating threat over here, and white should be significantly better. So after bishop f6, we have to play gf6. And this is something that Yermolinsky in his 2005 book on the Classical Sicilian calls the causal suicide variation. Causal being one of the main theoreticians in this in the Classical Sicilian. And you'll see many of his games. And in this position, okay, there are many moves. I think king b1 is the main move. There are sidelines such as like f5. But this, I think, is maybe gives black too much because we can place our bishop on a great square after knight takes d4, queen d4, and like bishop h6, king b1, and bishop f4. And suddenly we're getting our bishop to e5. For example, knight e2 is possible, and like bishop e5. This is a very interesting position, but I think overall this provides pretty good chances for black to equalize with like queen b6 coming next. Yeah, and we can even like start pushing the pawns forward and try to get an attack going. And so f5 immediately allows knight d4. How about knight c6 here? So this allows bishop c6, but I think like for example, there are like two moves here, which is queen e1, the most commonly played move. I think that we should just go b4 here, noting that queen b6 cannot be played because of knight d5, and we're just losing here. So b4 we should play, and after knight d5, go a5. So it's very dangerous to take, and bishop d3, bishop g7. We should be quite happy here. For example, f5, bishop d5, ed5, and e5. So we're just going to close the position. Bishop e5 was played, and after king e7, we can actually see that the king is quite safe in the center. Often, it's not very often in these variations, but you can see it sometimes that and the casual suicide variation, our king is quite happy with being blocked off by these pawns. And yeah, Branco, one of the theoreticians in the Classical Sicilian, has played this against Nigel Short, and he won this in the Manila Interzonal 1990. We just can continue with the game with bishop c6 and rook b8. We have a lot of compensation here. For example, queen h4, queen b6, rook h1 and h5. So a common move here, just allowing the bishop to go to h6, for example. And after king b1, rook b to g8, rook d3, bishop h6, a3, queen c5, rook e2, rook g4, queen e1 and rook b8. We should be better here. Yeah, rook b8 was played in the game, but even the computer right now recommends h4 here. But basically we can see that this position is quite active for black, and we should be happy to go into it. So f5, yeah, that's what possibly could happen after queen e1, which is an interesting idea. Queen e3 is also another interesting idea, just to prevent queen b6. It also defends the e4 pawn. And this is, I think, very important note too, that we need to take control of this long diagonal. So, for example, queen e7 is a very nice move. It's very rare we find this type of move, but the idea is that we want to swing our queen to a7, after which we should be quite happy taking control of this diagonal. So bishop d3 and b4 first, just to force the knight to e2, where after knight e2, queen e7 become even stronger. For example, knight e2, queen e7. Queen h3 is the most commonly played move, and after which I think queen c5. We've already consolidated the position. Black has a great score here. Yeah, we can just possibly play, like, for example, king b1 and a5. We can just try to push the pawns forward, and we should be more than happy here. So that's what happens after queen e3. So just remember that queen e3, we need to play queen e7 and take control of this long diagonal. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it for knight c6. So the next variation is king b1, which I think you'll probably face most often. After which we can play queen b6, a very thematic move in the main line. After which knight c6, bishop c6, and f5. This is technically pawn sacrifice, because after b4, for example, we can go b4 and knight e2, and we can take on e4, but it's very dangerous here. So don't do that. And the move I recommend here is actually h5. We can see that in one of the instructive games that Anand played against Caruana, where Anand won the game, I think h5 was also chosen in that game. I think it's a very important move, because if we go b4 knight e2, this allows the knight to go to g3, and if it goes to h5, then we're going to have a lot of trouble here. So for example, e5 is necessary to prevent knight f4, applying more pressure. And for knight g3 and h5, it looks like we're going to get h4 in, but actually, if white plays a move like bishop c4, which is, I think, careless, it allows black to play h4, and we should be quite happy here. But in this position, white can actually fix the pawns here with h4, and suddenly this pawn on h5 becomes very weak. White is going to play queen e2 and capture on h5, and it's just better there, basically. We can see that in a game between Svidler and Dubov, it ended in a draw, but Dubov had to play very creative chess, and with like the king on e7, and he eventually lost the pawn, which I don't think is even sound. So I don't recommend going into this. I think white is just simply better objectively. So rather than pushing b4 here, I think it's important to play h5 to prevent like b4, knight e2, knight g3, because now we even have the option of playing h4. And I think here we should be quite happy with the position. H4 just weakens too many squares. We want to come with b4 next. Queen e1 is apparently the most commonly played move, just defending this guy. But after b4, knight d5, bishop d5, pawn takes, and e5 here. I think we're gonna get quite a reasonable position with like the bishop coming to this long diagonal. The king can even come to e7, and we should be fairly happy in this position. So that basically covers the knight 6c6 here. Yeah, after which we play h5. Another interesting move is knight ce2, just anticipating the b4 move and just trying to recapture on d4 with the knight, for example. And from here, I think we can follow a game by Stockfish 8 versus Leela in 2018. This was actually explained in a video by Richter-Rauzer, because there are not many videos explaining the instructive points in the Richter-Rauzer, but I think this game is very instructive. Richter-Rauzer also brought it with great analysis. So I think h5 here was played, and it's very important to bring it to h6, and after which f5, we go bishop h6, queen e1, and knight d4 and e5. So this closes the center, but it also weakens the d5 square. So the question is that if white is going to be able to get the knight to d5, and the short answer is no, because after knight e2, the idea is simple, to play knight c3 and knight d5, but here we have the very strong move b4, taking under control the c3 square, and so knight d5 is not possible anymore. After knight c1, we play king e7, and suddenly the black king is very safe in the center of the board. So we can just continue to see this game. Bishop c4, rook ac8, queen e2. This all seems quite logical. And after a5, we're going to get a lot of play here. h4, just restricting white's queenside pawns. We will see this also in a game between Wei Yi versus Grishuk. So Grishuk played the black side, and this move was also implemented in the game, which we will see later. b3, a4, queen h5 was played, rook c to f8 to defend f7, queen f3, bishop c6, knight d3, a3, and we're gonna, yeah, we're already getting a lot of space here, and for example, knight f2, rook c8, queen d3, bishop c6. Okay, we can just continue this game. And here there are a couple of moves that I analyzed. I thought that h3 looked quite logical here, but apparently there's this very strong move d5 here, after which white is just lost. If ed5, then we have queen takes f2, noting that there's no more threat on the d6 pawn, because like, for example, here we couldn't take on f2 because of the d6 pawn, and so d5 just blocks that. And if bishop d5, then we can take on d5, queen d5, rook hd8, and I think that black queen is indeed trapped here. Yeah, so we're just winning in this position. And so the move played in the game was knight g4, bishop g5, king a1, rook hd8, king b1. So just trying to wait to see what black is going to do. But we're just really going to build up the pressure here with rook c5, knight e3, bishop e3. So very, very nice move here. Positionally, we just don't want to allow the knight to get to d5, even at the cost of giving up our strong bishop. Queen e3, bishop a6, and like, okay, we can just continue this game, and this is a beautiful positional game here by Leela. It did a lot of like shuffling, but after which there's also, like, for example, in this position there's a threat of rook g1, just weakening the back rank, and also like picking up h2, and this position's already like significantly worse, and this endgame is just lost. For example, we can see the continuation here with two connected passers. We should be winning this. Yeah, okay, and we can see this position simply winning. Yeah, so that's a very nice game that I recommend you see again and revise again. But basically we're just gonna go back to the other position. So yeah, that basically covers the king b1 move, and overall that's going to be the most of the theory in this video. I'm going to be discussing, I think, like, okay, maybe in this position I should actually start going over the other moves. So in this position, we can obviously play bishop b7, f4, and the b5, which is the old main line. But there are also other moves to play, which is not like the modern standard approach to play. Okay, first there's the move h6. So this is the mainline Rauzer in the 1980s. Kramnik and Anand also have played this a couple of times with the black pieces. This move first off allows the white bishop to retreat to e3, which is typically something that white wants to do anyways, because once, for example, if white gets an f3, g4, h4, h4 even, then this h6 pawn may be even a weakness. It may be like a hook. And with the bishop on e3, it allows white to get in g5 much more quickly. And so here there are many moves. So this is just maybe for your information. Bishop h4, it's very sharp, but it allows us the following knight e4. Okay, we can just continue with this. Like we're just gonna win a pawn here if white does nothing. So queen f4, knight g5, knight c6, bc6. This is all forced. Queen a4, queen b6, f4, knight h7, and here if we get in bishop e7, we're just going to like be happy with the king in the center. Bring the rook to d8. We're just going to be up a pawn here. So for example, if I move like bishop c4, then we can just play bishop e7. But the very interesting and sharp move here is f5, after which we can play rook b8, threatening b2. But white is not going to care about it because this is more urgent. After bishop e6, bishop c4, and bishop e7, bishop e6, f e6, bishop e7, king e7, queen g4. We're just gonna have to come to terms with this, that we're going to have to give up this pawn. After queen e3, rook d2, rook f8, rook h to f8, queen g7, rook f7, queen d4. We can liquidate into this endgame after d5, rook a4 and rook a8, rook e1 and knight f6. This is just a sample line to show that black should actually be slightly better in this position with the center pawn mass, and this pawn majority on the king side is not very useful because our one pawn we know that typically can restrict these two pawns. So that's the very sharp line after this bishop h4 move. After this bishop h4 move in this position, there are also other considerations such as like bishop f6, queen f6, and knight b3. So in this position, it looks like white has a lot of pressure on d6, but we can play the very strong move here, queen d8, because the queen doesn't want to be stranded on f6 here, and when we play bishop e7, so it's going to be much more useful in this side of the board. Black seems to have a good score here, so you can pretty much do your own research here. Because there's so many variations that I need to cover. Knight c6 here is an interesting idea. This is very sharp. A sample game that we're going to follow is the game Spraggett versus Pogorelov in 2005, but there are also many games that happen after. For example, we can see Ivan Chuk, one of the main contributors to the theory in the Classical Sicilian. He's played this bc6, bishop f4 is one of the ideas, because bishop e3 just runs into d5, and so bishop f4 and d5 here, so nothing else makes sense. Queen e3 is an interesting move, just to prevent first off queen b6 and also like try to apply pressure to the center of the board. And here I think I'm quite happy with the line that I found, which is like just going bishop e7. I think that bishop b4, it's more common, but it's too ambitious. And after bishop e2, we can just follow a line like castles, e5, knight d7, and queen g3. Suddenly there are threats on h6. And if we play, like the computer recommendation is queen c7, but I think we're just worse after bishop h6, queen e5. f4, queen f6, bishop g5, queen g6, h4, f6, so this is all forced, h5, queen f7, bishop h4, and bishop d6. After bishop d3, these bishops are menacing. Black is holding on basically by a thread. Even though the computer says plus 0.2, I don't personally believe it. So queen c7 and like this, I think this entire bishop b4 idea is too ambitious here. And so I think bishop e7 just calmly develops, and after bishop e2, now we can castle. And the difference is that, for example, after h4, we can go knight d7, queen g3, and king h8, bishop c7, queen e8, and okay, there are two moves here. I think after rook h1 we can just play bishop b7, develop like usual, because we cannot play bishop d7, so bishop b7 is logical. Bishop f3 can follow, rook c8, bishop d6, and in this position it seems very tempting to just take on d6, but after bishop d6 and queen d6, I think this is already pretty much lost here for black, because we're super cramped in this position, and everyone seems to be playing queen d8 here. But after knight e4, queen c7, queen c7, rook c7, and rook e3, the computer agrees that we have like no useful moves in this position. The computer recommends either g5 or g6. Maybe g6 is more logical, but rook c3 is going to come, and these dark squares around the queen side are very weak. And so don't take on d6 in this position. We should play the move knight b6 here. I think that we can free our position with this move, and we should be quite happy here. So after bishop e5, the move that we need to find is f6. So I understand that in this game, apparently Vladislav Kosulin played rook g8, which is understandable, because after f6, we need to follow this forcing line with bishop c7, knight c4, and for ed5, we have to play cd5. It's too dangerous to weaken all of the light squares around the king here, so we need to play cd5. After which rook e6 happens, and we get into a very forcing variation, which understandably is maybe one of the reasons why Kosulin didn't want to go to this, because after bishop d5, rook e4 is the computer move, and the only move to keep basically equality is in the eyes of the computer. After knight b2, a desperado move, attacking the rook also. There's king b2, rook c7, knight d5, rook b7, and after king c1, bishop c5, rook c4 was recommended by the engine, and I think rook b5 and all of these moves apparently equalize, but the simplest I think is just queen b5 here, and white is just forced to trade the queens. We don't even need to take. We're gonna have a bishop here, and we can just like reroute the bishop to better diagonal, for example. This should provide equal chances with both kings being quite exposed here. And so this is like something very critical to remember if you want to go into these variations. And so h4 here is the main move, but there is also the very dangerous queen g3, after which we have to play king h8. Bishop c7 can happen, but after queen d7, bishop e5 and queen b7. So very interesting maneuver here. ed5 can happen, cd5, rook d4, and knight e8 here. So this is a very strong move, after which I think white equalizes. So Ivanchuk chose this against Nisipianu in 1999. And we can see after bishop d3, bishop d7, just developing the last piece, rook he1, and bishop f6, we're going to equalize in this position. We're out of the worst, basically. And even in this game, we can see that Nisipianu actually made a terrible mistake and got into a worse position, but Ivanchuk didn't manage to find the win, unfortunately. So after rook g4, bishop e5, rook e5, we can see that we're basically out of the dangerous parts of this position. Rook b8, b3, rook c8, harassing the knight. Queen h4 was played in the game actually, and suddenly f5 hits, queen e7, and king g8, the only move to defend the rook and to maintain the advantage. Rook b4 was played, and the move in this position that Ivanchuk played was queen c7, which seems logical, but I hope you can see the difference that between queen c6 and queen c7. Okay, I've given you some time, I guess. So basically the main difference is that we're not defending, after queen c7, we're not defending e6, and this allows black to, or rather white to take on e6, and after rook f7, knight d5, we can simplify into this position where we're gonna restore material balance, where white hasn't, after for example rook c6, and we get the position, white has 3 pawns for the piece, and I think that if anyone has the winning chances, it's going to be white. And rather than queen c7, queen c6 is actually the move that would have brought Ivanchuk victory. So we're threatening this knight. And after knight d1, the idea is that we have knight f6 here. We're just threatening to trap the queen here with rook e8. So for example, rook h4, freeing up the b4 and a3 square for the queen. So we can go queen c7, attack this guy on e5. And after rook e2, rook e8, queen e3, and suddenly e5 hits, and we're basically winning in this position. We have e4 coming. This pawn mass is going to be decisive here. And so that's what could possibly happen after this queen g3 idea instead of h4. Just remember that in this bishop e2 castles queen g3 idea, we have to go king h8. And in the h4 in the h4 move, we need to go knight d7, queen g3, and also king h8. So only after queen g3 do we go king h8. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And yeah, in this position, instead of knight c6 and bishop f4, there's also the move bishop f4 immediately. This was all of the hot discussion in the 1990s, apparently. I mean, I wasn't alive then, so I wouldn't know, but that's apparently what the records say. So after bishop d7, knight c6, bishop c6, we're attacking this guy, so white needs to defend here with the move f3, and after which we can play d5. One sideline that was mentioned was queen a5, but I think this is just a bad move. After king d1, castles queenside, bishop c4, knight d7, and h4. I think white's play is quite fluid here. It makes a lot of sense. You don't need to think too much about it, while black is quite struggling to find a good plan here. Like, where are the pieces going to go? With the d6 pawn very weak. And so we need to immediately break the center with the move d5 here. And after queen e1, which is the main move, we can play bishop b4 here. This enters a very lovely queen sacrifice that I really like. But I guess we could play bishop e7 if you don't want to go into that. But I think I definitely recommend bishop e4. And after a3, bishop a5, ed5, knight d5, b4 here, and suddenly knight takes f4. This is a queen sack. So this is first off, after rook d8 and bishop d8, we can get two pieces for, or rather the rook and a bishop for the queen. And I think if we look at this position, bishop f6 is going to come possibly, or like bishop c7. And even though we're down a queen, I mean, we have the bishop pair and a lot of activity here. We also have the pair of rooks, which is quite nice. So this is definitely an option. But then again, if you don't want to go into this, you can always go play bishop e7, just a calm move. Yeah. And here, after h6, the old main line, as I've mentioned, the move here, we've discussed everything except the move bishop e3, which I think is the most logical. The idea being that white can either go for f4, g4, and try to kill us on the king side here, or go f3 and g4. And it's aligned with the idea that the bishop wants to go to e3 to allow the g5 push to be executed more quickly. And so here there are many moves. Bishop e7, f3 could happen, knight d4. So this is one of the ideas in the f3 variation, is that we want to take on d4. But the problem is that after bishop d4, white is quite happy to get this bishop on d4, recapturing and applying pressure here, which is something that we don't allow in the main line f3, which we will see in the next video. So after b5, we just simply want to play b4 and then e5 and then bishop e6. So if we can get that, we're going to be quite happy. After h4 here, which is one of these sidelines in this position, been played a couple of times, we can play the move queen a5, which is very thematic here. So this pretty much reaches similar position from the move order that we can see after this move order with like bishop g5 e6, queen d2 a6. So this is typical, but instead of playing bishop d7 here, or bishop e7 even, we can play h6 immediately, and after bishop e3, knight d4, bishop d4, b5, f3, and queen a5, we can see that we get the same position here. Just maybe in that position, the main difference is that we don't include bishop e7 and h4. I guess the way you can look at it is that it's quite similar, but maybe there are some pros and cons to both of the positions. And in here, there are three main moves. King d1, I think, is the most logical, basically just to secure the a2 pawn, but after which we can play b4. And after bishop f6, then we can play bishop f6. So maybe this is like one of the main differences in the line that we just saw. So just going back to that one. And here after f3, queen a5, king b1, b4. White has the option of bishop f6 in this position, and we're forced to take it with the g pawn here. I apologize for not flipping the board, but yeah, basically this is the difference, that without the inclusion of bishop e7, we have to take with the g pawn. And so I guess this version is should be slightly better with bishop f6. And queen takes d6 here, I don't think works, because we can play bishops bc3. For queen c6, just forking, we can play king e7, and I think white is forced to go for the draw here with queen d6 and just repeating, because if queen a8 happens, then queen b4 comes and we're going to deliver mate here. Oops, not bishop e7, but after queen a7 we can play king f8, and we're just winning here. So yeah, queen d6 doesn't work, knight e2 has to be played. And I think after, like, for example, just bishop e7 defending d6, we already have a lot of initiative here. In the future, we can just clear our, move our queen away from the a5 square to allow for a5, a4. Bishop e7 is also going to come. It's going to be on a better diagonal. We can even castle, and we should be okay here, with our queen also providing support on the 5th rank. So we're going to be quite happy in that position. So king b1 allows that. What about the move a3 here? After which I think we can get the typical setup with e5, bishop e3, and bishop e6. And here, obviously, if knight d5 happens, then we can trade the queens, and then we can give black a pawn on d5 there. But if king b1 happens, then we can play rook b8, aiming at b4 here. Knight d5, queen d2, knight f6, and then gf6. So this is a very anti-positional move, basically. After bishop d2, there's the move h5 here. So the reason, okay, this is maybe something that you've seen in the famous Ivanchuk, or rather no, Anand game, where he like puts the bishop on c4, for example, with like ideas of like rook h3 in that sort of famous game. But it's quite a different position here. After bishop d2, h5, this endgame I think is quite decent for both sides. But overall, I'm quite happy to reach this position with black, because we have the semi-open g-file. This g2 pawn is going to be a critical weakness. We both have the bishop pair, and we should be able to put some pressure on this weakness here. And so a3 is reasonable, but we can just play e5 and bishop e6. The main move here is queen f2, after which we have to play rook b8 to prevent bishop b6. And we're threatening b4 and taking on e2, so king b1 can happen after b4, knight e2, e5. So the typical way to get in bishop e6, bishop a7, rook b7, knight c1, try and head to b3 or d3, mainly b3. After which we can play bishop e6, bishop e3 just retreating, and d5 here. I think that black in this position gets what they want. The d5 break is in. After knight b3, queen a4, bishop c5, we can just castle here. And if they take on e7, rook e7, and g4, then we have to play this move d4, which is an important move that was developed by Salov. He played this against Ivanchuk. For example, bishop h3 and queen c6. So freeing for example, we can just see the continuation after knight c1, which is played in the game, and then knight d7. So the move played in the game was bishop c4, but here knight d7 is very strong. After g5, we can trade off the bishops and play h5 ourselves, and we're suddenly closing off this, the king side. f4 is reasonable just to try to break open the center here, but after knight c5, this is a very wild position, I think. But black objectively should be better here. The e4 pawn is going to fall, and I suggest you do your own research here. Next, yeah, in this position it may seem tempting to take on d4 actually, but I think g5 comes in very quickly, and we're just close to losing here, I think, at least practically speaking. So yeah, bishop e7 works that way, and if g4 happens, then yeah, we can play d4 here. I think this transposes to the game we just saw. So that covers that variation with the queen f2 line. And maybe in this position, instead of going for f3 and going for that type of game, white can also choose the move f4, but after which knight d4, bishop d4, and b5. And so this is based on my notes between 1985 and 1995. This was the most common variation in the Richter-Rauzer. So we noticed that the bishop isn't on d7 yet, unlike in the modern approach, and we have already played b5 here. And so a couple of moves have been played in this position. Bishop e2, it's an interesting pawn sacrifice because, again, we can push b4 and kick the knight away and then take on e4. But this apparently gains full compensation after like b4, knight a4, knight e4, queen e3, knight f6, bishop f3, and rook b8, bishop a7. And yeah, here, apparently the best move is bishop d7, just giving the exchange. But after knight b6, bishop b5, yeah, was apparently played the most. So maybe, yeah, other moves like rook b5 can be considered here. But I think just following the main theory, bishop b5 here, and I think we're quite happy to give up the exchange to neutralize the bishop pair, because these are very menacing bishops. And so if we get the bishop pair and we get a pawn also in return, we're going to be able to castle safely, and we should be very pleased. So bishop e2, we can go into that pawn sacrifice, or we can just simply castle, I guess. And against bishop d3, which just defends e4, I think is the most logical. You can play bishop b7, king b1, and castles here. After e5, de5, fe5, knight d7, knight e4. This looks quite dangerous, but we're actually quite fine if we trade off the knight, the very active knight, for the bishop. Bishop e4. Yeah, okay. Objectively, this should be slightly better for white with the monster bishop pair and the piece activity. But I think this is like the best thing that we can go for. We can maybe follow a Kramnik and Kasparov game. You can look at it yourself. I'll probably link it in the description. Yeah, and so that's one of the possibilities. Yeah, so that basically covers this h6 move, another way to play the position. So we've discussed this move and all of the variations in this very complicated line, and we've also discussed bishop d7, f4, and b5 here, which is the old main line. So that's gonna be it for me in this video. This has been a lot of content, I know, but I hope it's gonna be useful for you. you can just follow the analysis again in the BGN that I've uploaded in the description below. And I hope you're all having fun in this series. You've learned a lot, and I hope to make more videos. So yeah, so far I've received only positive feedback and also constructive criticism. I hope to be able to produce more quality chess videos, and hopefully the analysis holds up. So thank you again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Do follow me on my other social medias, and I also stream on Twitch. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I hope you all stay safe and have fun playing chess, and most importantly, play the Richter-Rauzer. And also, like, hopefully you understand how to play against it and with the Richter, with and against it. So yeah, I guess that's it for me. Goodbye. Thank you everyone.